1 Samuel chapter 18. The reading will be longer today because we're going to hear the whole story of David and Jonathan before I bring Josh to you here. Let me tell you about him first, though. Joshua Jackson. He is a younger preacher. He's one of our preachers. He did one of the keynotes at Pepperdine in May. He got his bachelor's degree in youth and family ministry and did youth ministry for a while at Abilene Christian University. He got his MDiv, his Master of Divinity through Candler, I think. Yeah, Emory School of Theology at Candler. And his specialization was church leadership. He was an assistant minister at North Atlanta Church of Christ, where Don McLaughlin, many of you may know Don McLaughlin, is the pulpit minister. He was there for 5 or 6 years before he became the pulpit minister last year at Argyle Church of Christ. I really hope they wear great socks to service there. Like in with a giveaway to visitors, it should be socks at that church. In Jacksonville, Florida. So he has only been there about a year. And I told Josh, I was talking to him this week, that we were going to play his sermon, and he was very honored and humbled by that and is looking forward to hearing what you have to say about it, what you think about it. And Jared's going to come talk to you at the end about maybe some of those opportunities to talk further, but talk about it. It's a bit controversial. That's why we're using these Pepperdine sermons. They're great, and they are conversation starters. So keep the conversation going. But to understand the conversation and where Josh is coming from, you need to know the story of Jonathan and David. So there in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 1 through 4, I'll begin there. After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit. Some translations say Jonathan's soul was knit to the soul of David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return to his father's house. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and he gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Now flip over to chapter 20, please, in 1 Samuel. Turn the page. David and Saul had a complicated relationship. Remember, Saul is king and David is going to be the new king, and it gets to the point where Saul is trying to kill David. So then in 1 Samuel 20, David has to run away for his life. David fled from Naioth at Ramah and went to Jonathan and asked, "What have I done? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father that he's trying to take my life?" "Never," Jonathan replied. "You are not going to die. Look, my father doesn't do anything great or small without confiding in me. Why would he hide this from me? It's not so." But David took an oath and said, "Your father knows very well that I have found favor in your eyes," and he has said to himself, "Jonathan must not know this, or he'll be grieved. Yet as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, there's only a step between me and death." Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you want me to do, I'll do for you." So David said, "Look, tomorrow is the new moon festival, and I'm supposed to dine with the king. But let me go and hide in the field until evening of the day after tomorrow. If your father misses me at all, tell him, 'David earnestly asked my permission to hurry to Bethlehem,' his hometown, 'because an annual sacrifice is being made there for his whole clan.' If he says, 'Very well,' then your servant is safe. But if he loses his temper, you can be sure that he is determined to harm me. As you know, show kindness to your servant, for you have brought me into a covenant with you before the Lord. If I am guilty, then kill me yourself. Why hand me over to your father?" "Never," Jonathan said. "If I had the least inkling that my father was determined to harm you, wouldn't I tell you?" David asked, "Who will tell me if your father answers you harshly?" "Come," Jonathan said, "let's go out to the field." So they went there together. Then Jonathan said to David, "By the Lord, the God of Israel, I will surely sound out my father by this time the day after tomorrow. If he is favorably disposed toward you, will I not send you word and let you know? But if my father is inclined to harm you, may the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if I do not let you know and send you away safely. May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. but show me unfailing kindness like that of the Lord, as long as I live, so that I may not be killed. And do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord call David's enemies to account." And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. Then Jonathan said to David, "Tomorrow's a new moon festival. You'll be missed because your seat will be empty. The day after tomorrow, toward evening, go to the place where you hid when all this trouble began, and wait by the stone Ezel. And I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I were shooting at a target. And then I will send a boy and say, 'Go, find the arrows.' If I say, 'Look, the arrows are on this side of you, bring them here, then come, because as surely as the Lord lives, you are safe. There is no danger.' But if I say to the boy, 'Look, the arrows have flown beyond you,' then you must go beyond, because the Lord has sent you away. And about the matter you and I discussed, remember, the Lord is witness between you and me forever." So David hid in the field, and when the new moon festival came, the king sat down to eat. He sat in his customary place by the wall opposite Jonathan, and Abner sat next to Saul, but David's place was empty. Saul said nothing that day, for he thought something must have happened to David to make him ceremonially unclean. Surely he is unclean. But the next day, the second day of the month, David's place was empty again. Then Saul said to his son Jonathan, "Why hasn't the son of Jesse come to the meal, yesterday or today?" And Jonathan answered, "David earnestly asked me for permission to go to Bethlehem. He said, 'Let me go, because our family is observing a sacrifice in the town, and my brother has ordered me to be there. If I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away to see my brothers. This is why he has not come to the king's table.' Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, and he said to him, 'You son of a perverse and rebellious woman.'" The Hebrew version is stronger than that. "Don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send and bring him to me, for he must die." Why should he be put to death? What has he done? Jonathan asked his father, but Saul hurled his spirit in to kill him. Then Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. Jonathan got up from the table in fierce anger on that second day of the month. He did not eat because he was grieved at his father's shameful treatment of David. In the morning, Jonathan went out to the field for the meeting with David. He had a small boy with him, and he said to the boy, "Run and find the arrows I shoot." As the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. When the boy came to the place where Jonathan's arrow had fallen, Jonathan called out after him, Isn't the arrow beyond you?" Then he shouted, "Hurry, go quickly, don't stop." The boy picked up the arrow, returned to his master, and the boy knew nothing of all this, only Jonathan, David knew. Then Jonathan gave his weapons to the boy and said, "Go, carry them back to town." After the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone and bowed down before Jonathan 3 times, with his face to the ground. Then they kissed each other, and they wept together, but David wept the most. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever.'" Then David left, and Jonathan went back to the town. Go over a few more pages to 2 Samuel chapter 1. 2 Samuel chapter 1. At this point, David has taken the throne. 2 Samuel chapter 1. And there's a battle, and Saul, the king, the father of Jonathan, and Jonathan died in battle. And David writes a lament song about it that did not end up in the book of Psalms. Somehow it ended up here at the beginning of 2 Samuel chapter 1. And part of this song that he wrote for Saul, the king who treated him horribly and tried to kill him, and his covenant friend Jonathan is here. Verse 23 and following, 2 Samuel 1:23. David says, Saul and Jonathan, in life they were beloved and gracious, and in death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles and stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and finery, who adorned your garments with ornaments of gold. How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother, for you were very dear to me. Your love for me was extraordinary, more than that of a woman. How the mighty have fallen, the weapons of war have perished. The story of David and Jonathan from 1 and 2 Samuel. And now let us direct our thoughts to Joshua Jackson's interpretation of their relationship and what it has to do with the church today.
So to say that their relationship is awkward is kind of an understatement. To say that their relationship is unique just doesn't quite hit. But as I was going through this text, I did what I had been trained to do, that you start with the text, you stay in the text, and you wait for a word from the Lord. But I have to be honest that I never felt comfortable with the text. The text is hard. It's difficult, it's unique, it's strange, it's complex. And the relationship between David and Jonathan just stirred something in me. And as I was doing this, and then I began to start my exegetical process, only to recognize that I wasn't exegeting the text, but I was analyzing the relationship. And the discomfort that I was feeling was my own discomfort, and nobody else was uncomfortable because David and Jonathan were fine. And so was the writer of the text. So why was it that I was uncomfortable? Why was it that I was wrestling, that I was struggling? And I began to exegete my own life through the text. And what I began to realize is that what makes us uncomfortable about David and Jonathan is that we have a false sense of masculinity. See, the relationship with David and Jonathan drives us bonkers. It puts us in uncomfortable waters. It puts us in a difficult predicament, mainly because we see David and Jonathan and we don't believe that men should act that way. We have this fear that if men get emotional, they get too close, they become too connected, that something is wrong with them and they must be not what they're supposed to be. And see, I had to dig down deep and to realize that I didn't know what it meant to be a man. Yes, I was born male, and yes, I had seen signs, but the way that I had been taught to define masculinity was to actually do everything that femininity told me was wrong. So we look at manhood and we say, how did you become a good man? Well, those things were feminine, so don't do that. Is that truly the way we define masculinity in our world? Is that a healthy way of seeing being a man of God? Because see, if you look at David's life, David lives in a life where there's about 3 different episodes to his life. There's the pre-time before he's in the house with Saul, and then his relationship with Jonathan, and then after Jonathan. And David is actually his best self, his healthiest self, his most humble self, while Jonathan is his best friend. It's after Jonathan's death that David's monster inside of him, the darkness that is constantly near him, begins to erupt and play out. There is no Bathsheba if there's a Jonathan. There is no pulling Michael back if there's a Jonathan. The reason that David is distressed and oppressed and he can't seem to find himself is because what he needs is his Jonathan. He needs the other wholeness of his masculinity. But see, we find ourselves in conflict because we're actually more comfortable with David the monster, David the rapist, and David the adulterer than we are with David the psalmist. Because we've been taught that masculinity is actually more about dominating femininity. And so we see David and Jonathan in this dance that's beautiful and complex, and it makes us uncomfortable because that's not what we've been taught to be as good men. But see, David was a great husband until Jonathan He's gone. David was a great friend. In his humility rose, and he was a great king. But after Jonathan, David is in despair, and chaos runs his house. Because David has no one to be fully transparent with. David is a shell of himself because his fullness was found in his relationship with someone who understood him. And so I don't believe that David and Jonathan's relationship has to be sexual, even has to be on the spectrum of even homoerotic. I believe that instead it's our discomfort that places him in that predicament, that places him in that view, because we're uncomfortable with real masculinity, or we don't even know what it is. See, we've begun to see that I'm a little bit more comfortable with David acting in negative, unhealthy behavior, because at least that's what it means to be a man. Are we really okay with that? Is that really how we function as men? See, David has a softer side, a more emotional side, and it's because of Jonathan that he's able to express it. See, their very first interaction, their souls are knit together, and Jonathan gives David of himself. He takes off his belt, his robe, he even gives him his sword and his bow, and he says to him that he loves him. And it's this friendship, it's this kindred spirit that they share, where they're fully transparent, fully open, fully able to embrace one another, that allows David to be a healthy king. And somewhere along the way, we looked at the relationship, and maybe you did just as I did, and it did something to me. About 5 years ago, when I was starting out in my ministry career in Atlanta, I had just finished, I just graduated from Emory doing my MDiv, and I was asked to be a part of a group, a very special group. And some of the men in that group are here with me today, and I'm so grateful for it. And what we called our group was Preacher Camp. So it's a bunch of preachers. We get together once a year. We live all over the country, but we get together once a year, basically to take care of one another. We pray with one another. We tell our stories to one another, and our relationship spans beyond our once a year get together, but instead we keep up with one another. We hold each other accountable. We hold each other in love. We are fully transparent. We're fully known and fully loved by one another. And as a minister, I had no idea how important this group would be to me. These men are my Jonathan. As a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ, it can be a lonely place. Because as a minister, yes, you're part of the congregation, but you're never fully in the congregation. The congregation holds you at a distance. They hold you in this place of, yes, you're part of us, but you can't fully be with us because we need to disconnect from you. And I understand. And so David as king, as he's walking this journey, as God has called him, he's on a lonely road of isolation and despair. And so David's trying to figure out how to navigate a new world when he doesn't have a roadmap to get to the destination. And Jonathan befriends him, and Jonathan shows him love and kindness, even at Jonathan's own apparel, because Jonathan is actually the rightful heir to the throne. And Jonathan sacrificed himself for the very sake of David and for the will of God to be made manifest. Not to take advantage of David, not to coerce David, not to manipulate David, but because he saw that David needed some guidance. He needed to be loved well. And I recognize that I too needed to be loved well. And yes, I've been married for 8 years, about to be 9, and I love my wife dearly. I would never ask for another. She is the greatest thing that ever happened to me. But there are some things that even my wife just can't understand. And it's not because she doesn't try. It's not because she doesn't have the academic IQ to do so. Instead, it's just because as a man, there are certain things that only other men understand. But see, we've been taught to put on a facade that men don't cry, that you suck it up, that you pull yourself up, that you don't show weakness, because that's not what men do. And so what we create by telling young boys who develop into men these things, we create these rage monsters who have no emotional outlet, who are mentally scarred, who are emotionally broken, and then we tell them that you should go off and be with somebody else to have a good relationship. And if you don't believe me, look at the text. The reason that David struggles in every female relationship is because David is a broken man who doesn't have accountability and have true love from somebody who knows better. So he's trying to navigate a circumstance for which he has no understanding of. And so David picks one woman and the next woman and the next woman, and he steals women and he takes advantage of women and he's manipulative. David looks like a mob boss toward the end of his life. The story of David looks a lot more like The Godfather than the crucifixion. But oh, when there was a Jonathan, David was a lot different. And so yes, I tell you that these men who I get together with once a year are my Jonathan, but how many of us actually need a Jonathan? Would we be better husbands, better fathers, better friends, better ministers if we had a Jonathan? If as men we had someone that we could call our best to, and that called the best out of us, that walked with us through our darkest moments, that kept the evil that was so close to us, so tangible within us, at bay. Would it make a difference? And see, that was where I thought God was stopping me. But oh, God had another plan. Because see, it wasn't about just do I need a Jonathan, but am I willing to be a Jonathan? See, in our churches, as we look at what some would say is despair and decline, I believe that we need to restore a true identity of what masculinity is. That we frame masculinity in very unhealthy and harmful and dangerous ways. And the way that we've done so is by oppressing our women. We've done so because we believe that the only way to be a man is to dominate something. When the Bible tells us that that's not the way it is. And if I, as a young minister, a young man, don't take other men under my wing and I don't communicate with them and I don't congregate with them and I don't fellowship with them and teach them that you don't have to blow up and blow out to be a man. Being a man is not about how many women you have or how much status you can acquire or how much power you can dominate with. It's not about those things. It's not about if you don't cry tears or showing no emotion or just pretending that nothing ever bothers you, so you keep stuffing things down deeper and deeper only to finally burst because there's nowhere else to place the hurt. But see, I've watched men, and I was one of those. Because I didn't know that I could do anything with what I felt. I didn't even know I was supposed to feel. The world told me that you just don't do that. But see, once I had a relationship with these group of men who showed me that it was okay to be my full self, I had to learn a language. I had to learn to communicate that which I was taught was not to be explored. And see, as a 32-year-old man now, it wasn't up until about 4 or 5 years ago that I actually learned to communicate my feelings. And as bad as that might sound, there are some of you who are older than me who've never done it either. And what's really disappointing is that some of those men are actually in leadership in our churches. We place really unhealthy, broken, dangerous men in positions to guide God's people and to lead God's people to a healthy life, and they themselves don't have a healthy support system. But see, we say that, oh, those things are for women. That's what women do. They just cry it out. They're emotional. We're not the emotional kind. But then I look at it and see that the reason I'm so uncomfortable with David and Jonathan is because what David and Jonathan have is actually what I most desire. But because of my discomfort, I teach the Bible school story of David all the time. That David is the great war hero because that's men. Yeah, we know David was an adulterer and he killed his friend, but hey, that's what men do. But something about the David who wraps himself in sackcloth and ashes and cries before God, the David that dances before his God, the David who kisses Jonathan, we don't want to talk about that. Because that makes David seem a little, but why? Why does David have to somehow have his masculinity questioned because he chooses to be helpful? Is there really something wrong with David? Or is it actually something wrong with us? Did we paint a false picture of David that looks more like the man that we wanted as opposed to the man that is? And is Jonathan more of a help to David as opposed to a burden that we just can't seem to wrap our minds around? So what I've tried to do as I've walked through this text, as I've analyzed this text, as I've seen this relationship, I find myself going back to their first encounter. In 1 Samuel 18, 1 and 4. And I want you to see this now through the necessity that David is about to journey on. In 1 Samuel 18, 1 through 4, as soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. And Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. He removed David from all community. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of his robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. Jonathan sees David in a dark moment, and he recognizes that this can only get worse. My father has pulled this man from his family and has told him that he will now reside in this space where he is a foreigner, where he is a stranger. And Jonathan says, I refuse to let that happen. I refuse to let this man do life alone. I refuse to allow David to journey through the brokenness of this world without some help. But instead he decides to bind himself to a man who's trying to figure himself out. And together, they wrestle through life. Together, Jonathan helps David calm the rage monster that is within him. The evil that is so pressing upon David is somehow held at arm's length when Jonathan is around. But oh, we need more Jonathans. Our church needs more Jonathans. More of our young men and even our older men need more Jonathans. But God saw us just as David, and he gave us all a Jonathan. The Jonathan that gave his life for the sake of his friends. See, the story of David and Jonathan is nothing more than a small glimpse into the life of Christ. The Christ that binds himself to us even in our darkest moments. The Christ that sees us in all of our brokenness and chooses to stick with us. The Christ, the Spirit that lives within us, that dwells within us, to help us keep our sinful, deathly nature at arm's length. But see, we don't see anything wrong with Christ doing what he did for us, but we find ourselves just uncomfortable about David and Jonathan. And the reason being because somehow we put Jesus in a category that's supernatural, and we put David in a category that has to be the man of the hour. And so God can do what men aren't supposed to do, and somehow men shouldn't act like that. And Jesus, well, he's God, so he gets a pass. But he wrapped himself in flesh. He walked in the clothing of man, and he also had some really close friends. I don't know about you, but the Bible tells me he did life with 12 really cool guys, and 3 of them he was a little bit closer to than the rest. And if you don't think that they ever spent time and that Jesus called them to account for their darkness, well, then you haven't read the Gospel of John where Jesus re-engages Peter after he denies him. See, the relationship between Jesus and his disciples is the same relationship that David and Jonathan shared. It's a relationship of helping men to find healthy masculinity. And every time that the masculine narrative comes out of reach, Jesus has to remind his disciples that that's not what Christian men act like. Peter, it's okay to put down the sword. It's okay to wash one another's feet. It's okay to be a little bit more sensitive and a little bit more humble. I just hope that David and Jonathan's story doesn't get couched in some bad narrative when it's really helpful. So what I would ask us to do this morning, what I would call us to do this morning, is to take a deeper look at David and Jonathan, especially how Jonathan behaves with David. And then to ask ourselves, can we be a Jonathan to someone? And here's why I'm saying this. So I did my undergrad at ACU, and part of my time in Abilene, I worked, well, I shouldn't say I worked, I served in Big Brothers Big Sisters, and I had a little brother. And my little brother, he was in 3rd grade at the time, but he was what they deemed a high-risk child. Now, he's in the 3rd grade. I don't know what high risk means in 3rd grade, but somehow they had defined he was at high risk. I don't know what a risk was, but hey, he was deemed that. And the teacher said, well, he just can't pay attention, he can't learn, he acts out, and he does all these things. And so the first time I met my little brother for lunch, I asked him to tell me about himself, and he told me about his mom. And he just went on and on about his mom, and after he kind of took a pause, I said, well, tell me about your dad. He said, I don't have one. And I said, well, then tell me about any other, father figure or man that you have in your life. He said, I don't have one. And so what I began to realize is that this young 3rd grader was not a monster. He needed a Jonathan. He needed somebody to walk the journey of life with him and to help him to learn what it meant to be a man. Because in the 3rd grade, he understood that being a male and being male meant to act out, to misbehave, to dominate, and to pick on girls, and to fight all day long. That's what he internalized. That's what he saw. And so my job was to show him a different picture. My job was to show him that that was an accurate photo. That vision of masculinity was detrimental and harmful, and it wasn't productive. But at the time, I didn't see my role as any big deal. Just as I don't think Jonathan sees his role with David as a big deal. But the Bible tells us that it was a crucial experience for David. Because David is vastly different with Jonathan. And the men of our church, the men of this world, will be vastly different if we decide to be better Jonathans to one another. And so I ask that we do so. Pray with me. Our Heavenly Father, there is nothing we can say, Father, that will give you the glory that you deserve. Father, beyond our imagination, you saw us in our weakest moments, our darkest days, and Father, you came near to us. And Father, you stripped yourself of everything. Like Jonathan, you took off your robe. You gave up your place on the throne, and you embraced us as your children, as your friends. And so, Father, we ask that we will model that life. A life that helps us to redefine what it means to be a man, and mostly what it means to be a man of yours, through the eyes of the cross that Jesus bore. Father, help us as men to be better husbands, better fathers, better friends. And Father, help our wives and the women in our lives to challenge us to do just that. That, Father, we never become comfortable with men misbehaving and being unhealthy for the sake of saying that that's just what men do. But instead, Father, we look to the greatest man who ever lived, our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Father, it's in his name that I pray. Amen.